Hello fellas! Welcome back to Top 5 Choices. This is Haley from Top 5 Choices, and I hope you all are doing good. In today's video, I am going to do a detailed review and pick the top 5 best FujiFilm cameras, 2022. After doing proper researches, we came to the conclusion that meets the best in terms of overall. Kindly leave a like if you find this helpful, and I'd appreciate if you subscribe to my channel and turn on post notifications if you haven't. We will be also providing affiliates link to purchase from Amazon. Kindly use it for best offers and purchase from anywhere in the world. We'll be back with more videos. FujiFilm has used the exact same chassis for the X-T32 as for its predecessor, so there are no surprises here, for better or worse. What that means is that you get a retro-styled body, which we think looks particularly attractive in the black and silver finish. An all-black model is also available. As is commonplace with FujiFilm cameras, there's a scattering of dials and buttons across the top and back of the camera, and a good degree of customization options. Beginners shouldn't be put off, however, as there's also a good auto mode which you can use, and lets you happily ignore as many of the dials and buttons as you want to. On the camera's top plate, there's a shutter speed dial, an exposure compensation dial, and a drive mode dial. Several of FujiFilm's lenses have aperture rings, but if you're using a lens that doesn't have one, such as the 15 to 45mm kit lens, you can use one of the dual control dials on the front and rear of the camera to make those changes. Focus mode is adjusted via a switch on the front of the camera. An FN button on the top of the camera can be changed to control a variety of different settings. On the back of the camera you've got a joystick for moving focus points around the screen or moving through the various menus available, and there's a Q button which can be used to access commonly adjusted settings. A frustration of the original X-T30 was this button's placement. It's awkwardly situated on the thumb grip, and it's ridiculously easy to push it when you don't want to, and conversely slightly hard to find when you do. Sadly, FujiFilm hasn't seen fit to move this for the Mark II version, which is a bit of a mystery considering the number of reviews that complained about it. The grip on the front of the camera is fairly slight. This isn't a chunky camera, but it still feels relatively secure and comfortable in your hand. Those with large hands may find it just a little on the small side, in which case we'd probably recommend the XS10 instead. The FujiFilm X Pro 3 is a 26-megapixel mirrorless interchangeable lens camera built around a clever optical/electronic viewfinder and designed to look like a classic rangefinder. This, the third iteration of FujiFilm's first X-mount camera, gains titanium top and base plates, but the most noteworthy feature is an LCD panel that faces the back of the camera and needs to be flipped down to use it. The viewfinder and rear screen are the main distinctions between this and the similarly spec'd X-T3.AT. First glance, it's only the rear screen setup that distinguishes the X Pro 3 from its forebear. The top plate layout is essentially identical, despite the change in body material. It's on the back of the camera that the real changes have taken place. The four-way controller has been removed, as has one of the buttons to the right of the viewfinder. A touchscreen has been added, but, because the screen is usually folded out of the way, it's only really useful for waist-level shooting. The X Pro 3 has the same combined shutter speed/ISO dial, on which you have to lift the outer ring and rotate to change the ISO setting. We've not always found this the easiest control to operate, particularly while shooting through the viewfinder, but it undeniably adds to the retro appeal of the camera. Most people will be happy to leave it set to a mode, so this isn't a major drawback. You can always cycle between auto ISO presets by configuring a button to do so. As you'd expect, the X Pro 3's image quality is identical to that of its sibling, the X-T3, which means it's extremely good. The 26MP sensor performs well in terms of noise and dynamic range, and the color options remain as excellent as ever. The X-Trans color filter pattern continues to divide opinion on the internet, but we're not seeing anything in the images to justify any real concerns in this regard. The detail capture and its rendition in the JPEGs isn't quite up to the standards of the best current Bayer cameras, but it's not a difference that would sway our opinion of the images as a whole. The FujiFilm X-E4 is a lightweight, rangefinder-styled camera built around a 26MP APS-C-sized sensor that uses the company's X-mount lineup of lenses. Billed as a fun-to-use and compact photographic companion, the X-E4 is the smallest X-mount camera on the market, encouraging you to keep it around wherever you go. With FujiFilm's latest sensor and processor combo, the X-E4 inherits a lot of the goodies from the most recent FujiFilm cameras, including updated autofocus, solid video specs, and really impressive burst shooting rates. Relative to the Fujifilm X-E3, the X-E4 brings a suite of updates, the most important of which is the latest 26MP X-Trans sensor and quad-core X processor 4. This means the image quality and, in some cases, performance of the X-E4 will be a match for the best that Fujifilm has to offer in its X-mount lineup. The camera's body and controls have also been slimmed down relative to its predecessor, but we'll delve into those details in the next section. That 26MP sensor brings with it really solid image quality, a native base ISO of 160, down from 200 on the X-E3, and super-fast readout speeds that let the X-E4 fire away images at 20 frames per second with the electronic shutter, or 30 frames per second if you opt for a 1.25x crop. You also get super-fast electronic shutter readout that tops out at 1/32, 000 cc, which is handy for shooting wide open in bright daylight if that's your thing. The quad-core processor keeps everything moving pretty swiftly, and though you'll want the fastest memory card you can afford for those bursts, you won't gain any benefits from faster UHS-2 compatible cards with the camera's UHSI slot. It's still a good investment to get the fastest UHSI card you can, though. The X-E4 also comes loaded with Fujifilm's latest film simulations, including Eterna, which is a favorite for video recording, as well as classic NAG. And being able to reprocess raw files in camera to try out the different film simulations is a fun way to find what looks you like best. You also get an updated autofocus system with phase detection coverage extending nearly to the edges of the frame, as well as the improved tracking interface and performance we first saw on the X-T4. We found it's a very capable AF system, but may require some tuning to get the most out of it. The Fujifilm X-T4 is the company's latest high-end photo and video APS-C mirrorless camera. It brings in body stabilization, faster shooting, improved autofocus and a larger battery to the already very capable X-T3. Fujifilm says that the X-T4 is a sister model to the X-T3, rather than a replacement, which is borne out by the specs and pricing. It's a 26MP camera capable of 20 frames per second shooting and 4K capture at up to 60p. In use, we found it offers distinct benefits over both the X-T3 and the older X-H1. The X-T4's image quality is essentially the same as that of the X-T3, with the exception of the new color chrome effect blue processing option, 2 extra film simulation modes and a clarity processing parameter that applies large radius sharpening to give images more punch. The X-T4 features the same multi-shot HDR mode first introduced on the X Pro 3. This shoots, aligns and combines 3 images and tries to cancel out any movement that's occurred between them. To give itself leeway for alignment, the images are slightly cropped in and then upscaled back to 26MP, which results in a slight reduction in fine detail. The HDR mode has 5 settings, specified in the menus under Shooting Settings, Drive Setting, HDR mode. These are 200%, 400%, 800% and 800% plus, along with an auto setting that chooses from these options, based on how bright and contrasty the scene is. Unlike many cameras' HDR modes, the Fujifilm lets you shoot raw and, rather than either merging the data or only retaining a single image's data, the full raw data for all 3 shots appears to be retained. We've not yet found any software that's able to exploit this additional data, but the camera can reprocess HDR images to reduce the tonal range included in the final image, so if you find your HDR 800% images are too low in contrast, you can reduce them back to HDR 200 images with a narrower range, but more contrast. The X-T4 has an updated version of the one from the X-T3, with the biggest change being the promise of improved subject tracking, including in low light. Beyond that, it'll be familiar to existing Fujifilm users. You can select from a single AF point, a larger zone or the entire AF region, with a combined all setting that lets you scroll through all these modes as you adjust your AF point size. In the largest of these modes, SAF gives you wide mode, where the camera chooses a subject based on proximity and centrality within the frame, while in CAF you get tracking mode, which will follow whatever is under your initial AF point around the frame. Fujifilm's XS10 is a 26MP interchangeable lens camera that shoots high-quality 4K video and comes with a deep grip and a different, though excellent, control scheme than most other Fujifilm cameras. The company describes the XS10 as a cross between the company's X-T30 and the X-H1 cameras. You get the guts from the former and the design and in-body image stabilization feature, in a new miniaturized form, from the latter. The XS10 camera is targeted toward both beginning and experienced users who may have Canon or Nikon DSLRs and want something a little more familiar than a typical Fujifilm camera. And, with a price of $999 for the body, $100 more than the X-T30, it's not necessarily out of reach for that audience. Being a smaller camera, it's no surprise that the X-T4's IBIS unit wasn't going to fit into the XS10. So, the company designed a new one that is 30% smaller and lighter than the X-T4's. A new motion sensor makes the unit more efficient, and the XS10 has a redesigned circuit board that reduces power consumption. There's a very small difference in stabilization performance on the XS10 versus the X-T4, just half a stop. It offers 6 stops of shake reduction on all unstabilized FujiFilm lenses save for the XF16 to 55mm f2.8, which weighs in at 5.5 stops. Most stabilized FujiFilm lenses vary from 5.5 to 6 stops, save for the XF80mm macro, which offers 5 stops. These differences primarily have to do with how much coverage the lens offers outside the sensor area, not necessarily whether the lenses have their own stabilization. Those who stick to auto and scene modes will gain a few new features. The XS10 now has an autofilm simulation mode which will select between Provia, Standard, Velvia, Vivid, and Astia, Soft, depending on the scene. Users can still manually select any of the film simulation modes offered. In our testing, the camera seemed to err on the side of selecting Provia, at least with portrait shooting.